Get ready to believe in the Sawyer Robertson 2025 Heisman campaign because it begins right now on Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello there, Bears fans, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by FanDuel, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and the Cam Show on Rogue Media Sports Network. And this is the third time I've done the intro because for some reason my mic was muted the first two times, so I'm a little on edge going into this episode of Locked On Baylor, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today, we're going to be going over the Sawyer Robertson Heisman campaign. Not the first time you've heard about it, will not be the last time, but we're going to go into detail as to why you should start putting in those futures for Sawyer Robertson to win the dang thing in December of 2025. We will also look at the new Title IX NIL guidelines, which is, I know you've heard this before, going to change the way we look at college football and how specifically it's going to affect teams like Baylor. And then, of course, we'll be breaking down the TCU game at the Foster Pavilion yesterday. All that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Baylor. It's not the first you've heard it. It's not going to be the last you hear it. In fact, I will probably be driving this train the whole offseason. But to be totally honest with you guys, I am surprised that there's not any kind of chatter at all for Sawyer Robertson to have a Heisman caliber season next year. Is that a jump? Yeah. I mean, we're talking about the best player in college football, and you don't often see it from schools like Baylor, or better yet, schools that are coming off an 8-5. Doesn't happen a lot, right? Baylor, of course, has their Heisman Trophy winner, but you know what I mean. It takes a lot these days, and with the lack of hype that the Big 12 gets nationally, you would think that is also a hurdle. But we see Travis Hunter win it this year, which I think is part of this story, that a guy from the Big 12 can win it, which seems wild, because when I was growing up, that was certainly not a hurdle, right? In fact, in 2008, they should have had all three finalists, or four finalists. Three of them should have been from the Big 12. Instead, Graham Harrell was stuck at home. I think he finished fifth. So three of your top five were quarterbacks from the Big 12. And the top two were Big 12 guys. Bradford was one, Colt McCoy was two. So it was not like crazy to see Big 12 guys win it. Obviously, we saw RG3 win it. Manziel does it a year after they leave the Big 12, A&M. And now Travis Hunter doing it. We saw the OU quarterbacks do it. So it's not crazy, and it's not just the OUs and the Texases that win it. But nowadays, that is something that's like, okay, we cleared that hurdle because of how the Big 12 is perceived around the nation. But those of you who watched Sawyer Robertson in 2024 are not surprised to be like, yeah, he can make a push for that. Like, again, it's pretty impressive, but he can make a push towards it. And I see these early lists, and Arch Manning, of course, is up there. DJ Lagway is up there. But I'm seeing, Lenora Sellers from South Carolina, good player. I'm seeing Sam Levitt on these. And again, I mean, I don't need to rehash the Sam Levitt thing. His team had a better year, but he did not have as good a year as Sawyer Robertson did. And he was second team All Big 12 for some reason. And Sawyer Robertson was left off the list. So I see that, and I'm like, man, we got to dig into this. We have got to put out the campaign because it's not crazy. It's not propaganda. And I'm going to give you a couple of different perspectives as to why Sawyer Robertson could be on that stage at Radio City Music Hall next year. I'm going to look at it through a couple of different lenses. First, we're going to look at the quarterbacks that had similar years the year before they won the Heisman, similar years to what Sawyer Robertson had this year. We're going to look at what a good stat projection could be that Sawyer could win it with. And then we're going to take the Spavital influence into effect on this and how he has molded Heisman-worthy quarterbacks before. So let's dive into it. Looking at Sawyer Robertson's numbers, pretty impressive, especially for a guy who, again, didn't play the whole season. He didn't play the first two games, and they didn't really take the training wheels off game number one with him against Air Force. a 31-3 victory, but he throws in those, essentially 10 games, maybe even 9 if you want to argue that. 3,000 yards, 28 touchdowns, 8 picks. And I mean, the guy was just automatic for like 3 touchdowns a week during the winning streak, man. And so that's pretty respectable numbers. It's obviously those numbers aren't going to win you the Heisman Trophy, but certainly pretty respectable numbers, right? So let's take a look at some recent Heisman Trophy winners at the quarterback position. I'm keeping it in the last dozen years or so, which is where I think the college football quarterback position was really elevated. From about 2010 on, the last 15 years, the position got way elevated in terms of what you expect from a college quarterback at the high level. So I'm going to look at this season, 2018. This quarterback played 13 games, which is a couple more than Sawyer Robertson. This guy threw for 2,894 yards, so almost 2,900, whereas Sawyer just broke 2,800. 16 touchdowns, 5 picks, 7.5 yards per attempt, just under 8 yards, just about 13 yards completion, but 7.5 yards per attempt. And the next year, he won the Heisman Trophy. His name is Joe Burrow. Now, you look at that stat line from 2018, his junior year at LSU, and you're like, that's pretty similar to Sawyer Robertson. But we know the jump from 2018 to 2019 was massive for Joe Burrow, right? I mean, he has one of the best statistical seasons ever. 402 completion. I mean, led the nation in completions, attempts, completion percentage is off the charts, ridiculous at 76.3, 60 touchdown passes to only 6 picks. And of course, wins the Heisman, wins the national championship. It's one of the great quarterback seasons in the history of the sport, if not number one. So I say that to say it's fair that Sawyer's going to take a leap in 2025, but that's probably a leap too far. But you see that, junior year, nobody thought Joe Burrow was going to make that leap, and yet his numbers are pretty similar to what Sawyer's were this year. Okay, let's look at another one from recent memory. This quarterback getting 11 starts in his first year as a college quarterback, 64.5% completion percentage, 1,900 yards passing, 21 touchdowns, 4 picks. Not tremendous, right? He could do a little bit more with his legs than Sawyer could. And then the next year, as a sophomore, he throws 42 touchdown passes to just 5 picks, wins the Heisman Trophy. Also played in the Big 12. You know him as Caleb Williams, 2022 Heisman Trophy winner. And that 42 touchdowns, 4,500 yards, that's not crazy for Sawyer Robertson. So again, we go to worse stats than Sawyer in year one, and that jump seems a little bit more likely to 42 touchdown passes. 40 touchdown passes is probably going to need to be where Sawyer is at to get on that stage. Let's look at the Spavital angle of things, because this quarterback, you probably already know who I'm talking about, was under a different OC in his first year, the year he did win the Heisman Trophy, completed 68% of his passes, 26 touchdowns to 9 picks. That's not even as good as Sawyer did this year. And this guy won the Heisman Trophy that season. Could do a little bit with his legs, but I wouldn't say like, oh, yeah, he's a running quarterback. 8.5 yards per attempt, wins the Heisman. His name is Johnny Manziel. But what's important here is the next year, Johnny Manziel had better stats all across the board when Jake Spavital was his offensive coordinator. Okay, he goes for 69% completion percentage, 37 touchdowns to 13 picks, and is throwing for and increases yards per game by about 40 in that freshman to sophomore jump under Jake Spavital. And lest we forget, Sawyer's now played a season under Spavital, but this is the first time he gets the full off season as the starter with Jake Spavital. And all that put together, I think, certainly makes for confidence that he's going to make a big statistical leap. 60 touchdowns, probably not. But looking at all of those guys who had similar, if not the exact numbers, either the year before or the year they won the Heisman Trophy, and seeing what that leap can be. Sawyer Robertson can do that. He can be there. And there are some other quarterbacks that are returning that are getting way overhyped that we're going to talk about later this week and why Sawyer Robertson is better than those guys. So start telling your kids about the 2025 Heisman Trophy winner, Sawyer Robertson. And let's start telling them about this new Title IX guidelines that might make Baylor obsolete in college football, and plenty of schools like it. Let's go over that next on Locked On Baylor. Now, this here message is brought to you by PrizePicks, the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, PrizePicks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or regular season, PrizePicks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all the football action. And now it's playoff time. There's no better way to get in on the action than with PrizePicks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least two players. And if your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. I had less on Travis Kelce, 7. I think it was actually 6.5 receptions. He gets 7. I get burned by the Chiefs. Who doesn't? Ready to run your game this football season? Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing. Free money. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with PrizePicks. PrizePicks. Run your game. So we have some more news in kind of the NIL space in general around college football. Title IX is involved. I give you Title IX, I give you Baylor. It's not usually a great mix, right? We're kind of done with those stories. But there is going to be a big factor here with Title IX and everyone in college football. Now, the story broke over the weekend. And basically what it is this new NIL guidelines that's coming from Title IX, not necessarily even the NCAA. I'm going off the Ross Dellinger story from Yahoo Sports because Ross is just great on all of this. But basically, I'll just read it from here. The department issued long-awaited guidance related to Title IX. Revenue sharing payments from schools to athletes must be proportionately distributed to men and women athletes, or institutions risk violating Title IX, the 53-year-old federal law requiring universities receiving federal funding to provide equal benefits to men and women's athletes. So basically, what this is going to mean is, exactly what it sounds like. Whatever you are distributing to men's sports, you're going to have to distribute to women's sports and women's athletes as well. On the surface, good for progress, right? Good for humanity progress. But in actuality, in practicality, the way that college sports run, this is a bomb here. Like this is a huge deal. While we're just trying to figure out what schools can pay athletes what and how they can divvy up money and where NIL actually fits into that. And it's all a mess still a couple years into this thing. And now, if you're a big-time university, mostly big-time state schools, if you want to allocate $15 million to football, you're now going to have to do that with women's sports. And again, it's not just football. If you allocate $15 million to football, it's probably what, 22, 23 million to all men's sports. And then you got to put that number into women's sports as well. It's a very tough thing to do. And it's very un-NCAA because the NCAA is not equal. It's not. It's not a fair world. It's not equal. And we bitch about it all the time. But when it comes to brass tacks, this is why the U.S. soccer thing took so long for equal pay. Because the college football playoff that's going on right now, like that's the second biggest sports moneymaker in America. Okay? It's college football and 3 weeks of college basketball in March. That's where the NCAA makes its money. As good as women's basketball has gotten, it doesn't make its money off that. And to be fair, too, it doesn't make its money off baseball. Doesn't make its money off, those teams with schools with men's volleyball, men's soccer. They don't make money off that. They barely make money off men's basketball. A lot of programs don't. They don't operate in the black on that. So it's really tough to just say, oh, well, football brings in, for a school like Baylor, brings in $40 million in revenue every year, but you best make sure that goes to the softball players too. It's a tough thing to do. And by the way, Linda Livingstone is quoted in this story because she's ahead of the board of governors here. Like this is a big deal. Like she's absolutely a big part of this. And from what it sounds like from the quote, it almost seems like she was kind of caught off guard. The NCAA does not traditionally give guidance to schools related to Title IX, leaving those decisions to campus officials like Linda Livingstone, the Baylor president and the chair of the board of governors. Quote, we're going to have to all get back to campus and have a conversation about it and see what we think the implications are for what we're doing, she said Thursday. So not much there in the quote, but Linda Livingstone at Baylor will have a big part in this. And I think Baylor comes from a really interesting perspective, right? Not just the Title IX stuff and the low-hanging fruit that you can take from it, but the fact that they are a private school that's relatively small compared to a lot of its other member schools in the Big 12 and the Power 4 conferences, and one that has really elevated their profile in the last 15 years through athletics, almost all of it through athletics. Baylor became a better school because of their success in athletics, and Linda Livingstone gets that. She's been on the forefront of that. And they're also a school that does not receive federal funding, being a private school, but then again, I don't think that's going to matter here. And this is where I don't like it from another layer of why I don't like it is Baylor should not be told what they can and can't do with their money. If you're a state school and you're receiving that kind of funding, then you're entitled to that. That's why we know exactly how much coaches are getting paid at public schools. That's why they have to be very transparent on where your money is going. If you're going to give your money to a private school like Baylor or TCU or Duke or Stanford or Vanderbilt, you're giving your money to them. They don't have to tell you. They don't owe you that. And if a school like Baylor or TCU probably rightly says, hey, we're going to allocate a lot of money into football because we've shown we can be competitive in it, and that revenue keeps us alive, keeps us at the table. Because it's true. That's what it does. And so, yeah, on paper, it looks great. Like we want our female athletes to get paid. We don't want them to be like kind of living in the past of other athletes before NIL. But with this, it's going to now become a collective battle again, which does not favor private schools or schools like Baylor. Ohio State and Tennessee and Florida, they are going to kick our collectives' ass, okay? They're going to do it to every private school. So that is where we get back to the original days of NIL, which is probably not kind to a school like Baylor. They're always going to be at a disadvantage, but that is especially unkind to a school like Baylor. So, I get it. Again, on paper, it looks great. We want these athletes to get paid good money, but if we're breaking it down further, it's not a male versus female argument or issue with NIL, because there's only a couple of guys that are on the football team making real money. And trust me, like no one on the baseball team is making real money almost anywhere. So it's not proportionate within their own sports, let alone male to female, right? Like it's just, there's so much nuance here, and it could be just a couple of days, because this is Board of Education stuff, and there's a new president going into office today as you're watching this, and there's probably going to be a new director of the Board of Education if that even survives. So it could be like we could have, Tony Batiti of the Big Ten and Greg Sankey of the Big 12, or excuse me, the SEC, could be on the phone with Donald Trump as we speak to make sure this is going to kind of be ironed out. And we'll see where it comes in the next couple of days. But this could be another landmark case or guideline, if you will, in the world of NIL, and it might not benefit Baylor. But we'll learn more in the coming days. We're going to keep track of this because these NIL situations, I learn more as I go along. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. How it's going to help or hurt Baylor or whatever school you're looking at. Let me know down in the comments. And am I reading this wrong? Please let me know. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you like the video, like the video. It helps us out a lot. We're marching towards 4,000 subscribers. We're getting closer every day, and we need your help because you guys have helped grow this channel so much. So let me know down in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe. And Locked On Baylor rolls on. We're going to break down that TCU game. That's coming up next on Locked On Baylor. But first, a message from FanDuel, if you will, one of my favorites. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win that first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. That's the most I've ever had in a read. $300 when you win that first bet because you're smarter than you think. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Wow. Baylor basketball fans, it's okay to panic because that performance yesterday against TCU just can't be acceptable. Like it can't be. And it has me wondering, like, is this even a tournament team? Because right now I don't know. Like they don't have any marquee wins anymore. Arkansas stinks. St. John's not what it was. Oh, so you hung tough with UConn. Congrats. You haven't beaten a good team all year. And then you get a mediocre team from TCU playing in your own barn, and you do that. You're up, what, 13, 14 in the first half? And come out with that performance and get bullied in the second half and lose 74-71. Largest lead was 12. And they last led with 6 minutes left in the game. I honestly, the biggest takeaway from me in this game was that Baylor just got bullied. Like it was just schoolyard, whatever, 8th graders versus 4th graders. Like that's what it looked like, man. It's just, they didn't have the intensity. They didn't match TCU. They didn't match TCU's grit, any of it, effort. The refs were letting him play physical, and TCU played physical, and Baylor did not answer the bell. Like, how do you turn the ball over only 5 times on offense and lose to a team that's 2 games over 500, TCU? Help me with that. They don't have any identity offensively. They don't have any shot creators. The only thing that they're usually good at is out-rebounding teams, and they got out-rebounded by 16 yesterday. So, rebounding is one of the only counting stats you find on the side of a box score that you're like, this is what determines effort. Turnovers that you forced and rebounds. And hey, you forced 17 turnovers. Of course, 11 of them were in the first half, and then TCU made adjustments, and you had no answer to that. Norchad Omier leads the team in rebounds. 5. The walking double-double. The NCAA's active leader in rebounds. 5 rebounds yesterday. 20 points. Fantastic. Great. Ernest Uday, your opposite number. 16 and 15. Owned you on the block. I don't know if he was sick or something, but something was not right with Norchad Omier, and something wasn't right with any of this team. I'm searching every game for what this team's identity is, or what this team thinks their identity is. Because they're not a 3-point shooting team, and yet they took 7 more threes than TCU. They shot 25 threes. They thought they were a rebounding team, and then they go minus 16 in that category. They could be a out in transition team, but when you force 6 turnovers against a mediocre team in the second half, you're not going to have an opportunity to do that. They got outscored in the paint. They were doing that for a couple games. They were outscoring teams in the paint. Got outscored in the paint yesterday. They don't have it, man. And I don't know what these guys' roles are, and I don't know if they know what their roles are, but there is just all kinds of confusion on this team. It's time to start having the uncomfortable conversations in that locker room. It's time. I don't know how it hasn't happened already, but clearly something needs to happen. Like, this is not last year's team. And yeah, I know a bunch of people are going to point to the roster construction, and that's a big part of this. That is a big part of this, but that's something we can address later. This team right now, from what we've been told, should have the talent to not be this bad. They should have the talent to beat decent basketball teams, but they have not shown that once. They haven't shown it. Like, what are the good teams they beat? I'll wait. They are criminally underperforming right now. I just underperforming more than we've seen a Baylor team really do in a long time. Like last year's team in 23, like they should have gone further in the tournament. Like we know that. But I'm talking about a team that doesn't figure it out and doesn't give the effort, because yesterday was a humongous effort problem. TCU wanted that game way more than Baylor did. And I can't remember a team from a Scott Drew team that didn't put out the effort night in, night out. And after every game, we're questioning this team's effort and their basketball IQ. And yeah, what talent they have. There's enough time left in this season that you've got to figure it out. But it's you don't have a ton of slack here. You really don't. You got to start winning some games. You got to start winning some marquee games. You got to start beating some good opponents. Because this should have been a friggin' layup yesterday. TCU at home, that team that just lost to Utah, that even in Jamie's best years is a 500 Big 12 team. This is not one of Jamie's best teams. And they walked you. They walked you in that second half. There has to be some uncomfortable conversations in that locker room. There just has to be. Or they are going to be in danger of not making the NCAA tournament. That's going to become a real possibility the more of these games they lose. Like, you're not good enough to not beat mediocre teams. You're not good enough to not win your home games. And you got two birds stoned at once with that yesterday. Lost to a mediocre team and you lost to them at home. I said this on the postgame show. It rings true here. My opinion did not change on TCU. I didn't see that TCU team yesterday and thought, oh, I was wrong about them. That's a good team. That's a tournament team. I don't think they are. But my opinion on Baylor is changing by the day, by the game. It's getting lower. The bar is getting lower. They're in for a real treat. Utah and BYU. Kind of like what they did with the Arizona trip next week. The way both those teams have played, like those have to be wins. But, they'll say TCU, or they'll say Utah's been hot recently. They'll say BYU's the toughest place to play, and you'd be happy with a split, and we'll just have to be okay with a split. Let me know what you guys think, because I'm interested to hear. What are the solutions? What are even the problems? There's so many. Drop those down in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe. Helps out the channel a ton. 75% of you watching are not subscribed. And also listen to us wherever you get your podcast. That actually helps me out more when you listen. So, look, I'm not going to be offended if you just listen, you don't watch on YouTube. Or you can just do both. That's going to really help me. Anyway, thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. We'll see you later on today on your favorite show, Locked On Baylor.